I spent 13 years building a business from one rusted truck into $4.8 million. Then my parents handed it to my brother because he has kids. I laughed, nodded, walked out. 5 months later, they were the ones begging me. Before we get back to today's story, I have some exciting news to share. We have officially launched a brand new channel called Tales Beneath Skin. Over there, we are dedicating our platform to bringing you the juiciest, most jaw-dropping Reddit drama stories on the internet. We're diving deep into wild family feuds, shocking relationship betrayals, and epic tales of petty revenge. But we don't just leave you hanging with a cliffhanger. We track down every single update, plot twist, and final resolution so you get the complete, satisfying story from start to finish. Grab your popcorn, because we are serving all the tea with full context, community reactions, and top-tier narration that brings the chaos to life. Make sure to subscribe to Tales Beneath Skin right now so you don't miss out. You'll find the link in the video description, the pinned comment, and the collaboration tag. Thank you for your continued support as we grow this community. Now, back to the story. There's a particular smell to a landscaping yard early in the morning: cut grass, diesel, wet mulch, coffee gone cold in a thermos. I've smelled it every single day for 13 years, and on the morning everything fell apart, I remember thinking it smelled like success for once, instead of just survival. That was the day we signed the Harborview contract. 3 years I'd chased that account. Harborview was a corporate campus, 40 acres, 4 buildings, the kind of client that doesn't just pay you well, they make you legitimate. When Harborview signs with a grounds company, other companies notice. Their landscaping director, a stern woman named Patris who had turned me down twice, finally sat across from me in my little office trailer, looked at my crew records and my safety numbers and my client retention, and said, "You run a tight ship, Ms. Marchetti. Let's do this." I signed with the same pen I'd used to sign the loan papers for my first truck in a bank parking lot back, when I was 28, broke, and stubborn. I keep that pen in the same drawer as the truck's original key, a single steel key on a plain ring, worn smooth from 13 years of my thumb rubbing across it. I don't even drive that first truck anymore. It's parked behind the shop, retired, a little shrine to where I started. But I still carry the key. I'd have told you it was sentimental. That morning, I turned it over in my pocket the way I always do, and I felt, for one bright hour, like I'd finally arrived. Evergreen Ridge Grounds. 19 employees, a fleet of 11 trucks, commercial contracts across 3 counties, and every bit of it, every client, every contract, every line of the books, every 5 a.m. and skipped vacation and Christmas spent invoicing was mine. I'd started it alone. I'd built it alone. I'd almost lost it twice and clawed it back both times alone. So when my mother called at 6:40 that evening and said, "Deanna, your father and I want the whole family to come over Sunday. It's important. It's about the company," I felt a little flutter of pride. I thought, and this is the part that still makes me wince, I thought they were finally going to tell me they were proud of me. Sunday came. The whole family was there. My brother Nick and his wife and their 3 kids. My parents. And a man I'd never met, standing by the fireplace like he owned it, in a blazer with no tie and a smile that had clearly been practiced in a mirror. My father cleared his throat, and my mother folded her hands, and they told me. They were giving Evergreen Ridge to Nick, the business I built. Handing it to my younger brother, who has never planted a shrub, never bid a contract, never made payroll, never done anything in his life except need help. Because, my father said, and I will remember the exact shape of his mouth as he said it, "You'll work under him now. He deserves it. He has kids. You don't." And here's the thing nobody in that room understood, least of all the smiling man by the fireplace. You cannot give away something that was never yours to begin with. I didn't say much on Sunday. That surprised everyone, I think. My whole life I'd been the loud one, the one who argued, the one who fought, and instead I sat there very still while my father explained my own demotion to me like he was doing me a favor. I remember the room going kind of underwater. My mother was talking about family and fairness and carrying on the name, and Nick was staring at the carpet with his ears red, and his 3 kids were fighting over a tablet in the corner, oblivious. And the man by the fireplace, Craig, they'd introduced him, Nick's business coach. Craig has done incredible things. Craig kept nodding along, murmuring that's beautiful and family first at all the right pauses, like a man conducting an orchestra. I said, okay. That was mostly it. I said okay, I said I needed to think, and I drove home. And then I didn't sleep for 4 days. I want to be honest about how much it hurt, because the money isn't the story. The money never was. What broke something in me was the math they'd done in their heads. The quiet, casual arithmetic where 13 years of my life came out to less than the fact that my brother had produced grandchildren. As if I'd chosen to build a company instead of a family, and now the universe, via my parents, was correcting the imbalance. As if I owed them the fruit of my labor as a penalty for the shape my life had taken. My dog, Biscuit, kept nosing my hand at 3 a.m. while I sat at the kitchen table. I kept taking the truck key out of my pocket and setting it on the table and picking it up again, turning it over. That worn steel key. I'd bought that first truck with a cosign loan, co-signed by nobody, actually. The bank had wanted my dad to co-sign and he'd refused, said it was throwing money at a girl's hobby. I'd gotten a higher interest rate instead and paid it anyway. I remembered him saying that. I turned the key over and I remembered it clear as a bell. The next day my mother called. Her voice had a bright, brittle cheer to it, the tone she uses when she's decided a difficult thing is already settled. Deanna, honey, I hope you've had time to see how right this is. Nick's so excited. Craig's already helping him put together a whole vision for the company. A rebrand, he called it. A rebrand, I said. Modernizing. Craig says the name is dated. And he thinks Nick should have full signing authority on the accounts right away, so there's no confusion during the transition. You'll show him where everything is, of course. The passwords and the bank and the client list. Craig says a clean handover is everything. Craig says, I noticed how many times my mother said Craig says in 90 seconds. I noticed it the way you notice a small stone in your shoe, a tiny wrongness you keep circling back to. This man had been in my family's living room for what, a few weeks, a couple months, and already he was directing the disposal of my life's work down to the bank passwords. Mom, I said, who is Craig exactly? A pause, he's Nick's coach. He turns businesses around, he's very successful. Successful at what? Deanna, don't be like that. I got off the phone. I turned the key over in my hand one more time, and for the first time since Sunday, I felt something besides grief. I felt the old feeling, the one from the bank parking lot, from every 5 a.m., from every time somebody told me a girl couldn't run a grounds crew. I felt curious, dangerously curious. Because a clean handover is everything, Craig said, and I happened to know exactly what my company was legally, right down to the paper. And I was starting to suspect that Craig did not. To understand how much this betrayal cost, you have to understand how much I'd already given. I'm 41. I started Evergreen Ridge at 28, but the sacrifices started long before that. When I was 19, my dad's back went out and he lost his job at the plant. I was the one who dropped out of community college to work 2 jobs and help cover the mortgage. Nick was 16, and it was important he finish school without stress. When my parents' first house nearly went into foreclosure, I was 24, and it was my savings, the savings I'd meant to use to start my business 3 years earlier than I did, that plugged the gap. Nobody paid me back. Nobody offered. It was simply understood that Deanna would handle it because Deanna handled things. I built the company late. I built it anyway. And even after it was thriving, I was still the family's ATM and its emergency contact and its handyman. When Nick's transmission blew, I paid for it. When Nick and his wife had their first kid and money was tight, I loaned them $8,000 I never saw again. When my parents needed a new roof, I sent a crew and ate the cost. I did it gladly. I told myself that's what family means. I told myself the love was in the labor. 13 years of that. And their thank you was to gift my labor to the person I'd been subsidizing all along. Now, Craig Voss. I met him properly the following week when Nick asked me to have lunch so we can talk about the transition, no pressure. Craig came too, uninvited, sat down beside my brother, ordered a $40 steak, and did most of the talking. He was smooth. I'll give him that. He wore the blazer, he had the firm handshake, he called me Deanna like we were old friends, and he had a way of leaning in as if every word out of your mouth was the most fascinating thing he'd ever heard. He talked about legacy and abundance mindset, and how he'd coached founders of nine-figure companies. He said he'd built and sold 3 businesses of his own. He said he'd left the corporate world to help families like yours find alignment. But I've spent 13 years reading people across bid tables, and Craig didn't read right. The first crack, he told the table he'd sold a landscaping software company to a private equity firm in 2019. 10 minutes later, telling the same story with different hands, it became a logistics platform in 2017. I said nothing. I just filed it away the way I file a subcontractor whose numbers don't add up. The second crack was subtler and worse. Every time I tried to talk to Nick directly, really talk, brother to sister, Craig gently intercepted. Nick and I have actually already discussed that. Nick's really trying to step into his power here, Deanna, so let's let him lead. He wasn't loud about it. He was smooth about it. He was peeling my brother away from me one soft sentence at a time, and doing it while smiling, and Nick, my weak, sweet, easily led little brother, was letting him. And then the third thing. As we were leaving, Craig put a hand on my shoulder, dropped his voice so only I could hear, and the warmth was gone from it entirely. "You seem like a smart woman, Deanna," he said. "Smart women know when a chapter's over. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. There's a lot of money in that company, and it'd be a shame for the family to spend it fighting." Then the smile snapped back on, and he clapped Nick on the back, and he walked my brother to the car with his arm around his shoulders like a shepherd with a lamb. I stood in the parking lot, and I put my hand in my pocket, and I found the key, and I turned it over, and I thought, this man thinks he's taking a $4.8 million business. He has no idea what he's actually taking, and I don't think Nick does either. For 4 days I grieved. On the 5th day, I stopped. It happened at the kitchen table, 5 a.m., biscuits head on my foot, the key in my hand. I'd been treating this like a loss to be mourned. And somewhere in the dark, I finally heard my own voice, the founder's voice, the one that had got me off my knees in that bank parking lot, and it said something very simple. They can't give away what they don't own. Here's what everyone in that living room had gotten wrong: my parents, my brother, and most of all Craig Voss. Evergreen Ridge Grounds LLC was not a family business. It had never been a family business. It only felt like one because I was generous with my family. But the legal reality, the reality that lives in filing cabinets and Secretary of State databases and bank signature cards, was this: I was the sole member of the LLC. 100%. My name, and only my name, was on the operating agreement, the EIN, the business bank accounts, the commercial insurance policy, the surety bond that let us bid on big jobs, the vehicle titles, the yard lease, and this was the important one, every single client contract. My parents had put in exactly $0. My brother had put in exactly $0. There was no shareholder agreement to fight over, no board to overrule me, no shares to transfer. When my father announced they were giving Nick the company, what he was actually announcing was a wish, a feeling, a family verdict with no legal force behind it whatsoever. They could not sign anything. Only I could sign, and I was going to sign nothing. But I didn't gloat, and I didn't call them, and I didn't storm in with the operating agreement waving over my head. Because I'd learned something in 13 years of bidding against bigger companies. You don't reveal your position until it's decisive. And besides, I had a bigger question gnawing at me now than my own inheritance. Who was Craig Voss, and what did he actually want? Because a con man doesn't attach himself to a family with a nice but modest grounds company for the fun of it. Craig had smelled $4.8 million. And Craig believed that money was about to change hands into the pocket of a soft, agreeable, easily flattered man named Nick. So I did what I do best. I researched. Quietly, methodically, the way I research a subcontractor before I trust him near my clients. I started with the story cracks. Craig had claimed to sell a landscaping software company to private equity in 2019 or a logistics platform in 2017. I searched every business database I had access to as a business owner, state incorporation records in 3 states, federal trademark filings, LinkedIn, the trade press for both industries. There was no Craig Voss who had founded and sold anything. There was no acquisition. There was no 9-figure coaching client. There was a Voss Growth Partners, LLC registered 8 months ago in a state where you can register anything for $50, with a mailing address that turned out to be a UPS store. Then I got smarter. I called Marcus. Marcus runs a commercial cleaning company 2 units down from mine in the same industrial park. We've referred each other work for years, watched each other's yards during storms. Marcus knows everybody in the small business world of our region, the whole ecosystem of contractors and vendors, and apparently the sharks that circle them. Craig Voss, Marcus said slowly when I called. Business coach. Blazer, no tie, calls himself a founder. My stomach dropped. You know him. Marcus said, you need to sit down. What Marcus told me, and what I spent the next 2 weeks confirming with a folder full of documents, was this. Craig Voss was a serial predator of exactly one type of victim, an insecure man who had suddenly, unexpectedly, come into control of a business he hadn't built and didn't understand. Craig would appear as a coach. He'd flatter. He'd isolate his mark from the people who might warn him. He'd get himself named as a paid consultant with a management contract and, ideally, signing authority on the accounts to streamline the transition. And then he'd bleed the business dry through fake vendor invoices, inflated consulting retainers, and investment opportunities that flowed into Voss Growth Partners LLC until there was nothing left, and he'd vanish before anyone connected the dots. Marcus knew because a friend of his, a man named Gary Ostrander, who'd inherited his father-in-law's plumbing supply business, had lost nearly $200,000 to Craig 18 months earlier. Gary had been too humiliated to press charges. His business had folded. His marriage had nearly gone with it. So now I understood the whole shape of it. My parents thought they were rewarding their son. Craig thought he'd found his richest mark, yet a $4.8 million company being handed to a passive, flatterable man with a family so committed to the fiction of the gift that they'd browbeat the one person capable of stopping it. From Craig's point of view, I wasn't the owner. I was the obstacle. That's why he'd cornered me in the parking lot. Smart women know when a chapter's over. I could have gone straight to the law, but Nick wouldn't have believed me. Craig had him too deep, and Nick had spent his whole life resenting me for being competent, which made him allergic to being rescued by me. If I'd walked in with a folder of evidence, Craig would have spun it into jealousy. She can't stand to lose the company, so she's smearing your coach. I needed Nick to crack the door open himself, so I did something small and surgical. I invited Nick to coffee, just the two of us, and I made sure Craig wasn't there. He came defensive, arms crossed. If this is about the company, the decision's made, Mom and Dad. It's not about the company, I said. It's about Craig. I have one question and then I'll drop it forever. I slid a single sheet of paper across the table. Has Craig asked you to sign anything giving him signing authority on the business accounts, or to pay a retainer up front, or to put money into something called Voss Growth Partners? Nick's face did a thing, a small thing, a flicker. That's just how consulting works, he said, but he'd gone pale. How much has he already asked for, Nick? An $18,000 onboarding retainer. And he wants full account access by the end of the month, before the transfer's even. He stopped himself. His jaw tightened. You're doing this because you're bitter. Maybe I am bitter, I said evenly. I built that company and they gave it to you like a birthday present, so yeah, I'm allowed to be bitter. But I'm also right. That sheet in your hand is the state registration for Voss Growth Partners, 8 months old, UPS store address. And there's a man named Gary Ostrander who'd like to talk to you about what happened to his company. I stood up and put money on the table for the coffee. Ask Craig about Gary Ostrander. Watch his face when you do. That's all I want. Then decide whatever you want. I left before he could argue. And that afternoon, my phone rang. It was Craig. No blazer-smooth warmth this time, just a low, cold voice. You've been busy, Craig said. Digging around, calling people, poisoning your brother against me. I'd be very careful, Deanna. Slander's expensive. And I'd hate for the family to fall apart because you couldn't handle losing. A pause, and then the thing that told me I'd hit bone. That company's already promised to Nick. It's done. So whatever you think you found, it doesn't matter. You lost. Sign the papers and go be a good little employee. I let him finish. Then I said the only true thing I said that whole month. Craig, you keep saying I lost, but you've never once asked me the one question that actually matters. I let it hang. You've never asked me whose name is on the LLC. Silence, a long, beautiful silence. Then I hung up and I turned the key over in my pocket and I smiled for the first time in weeks. Craig moved fast after that call because predators always move fastest right before they're exposed. He pushed the family to accelerate everything. Suddenly, there was a lawyer's appointment, a lawyer Craig had recommended naturally, and I was being summoned to sign the transfer paperwork that Friday. My mother called with the brittle cheer voice cranked to maximum. It's just formalities, Deanna. Craig had everything drawn up. You just sign the operating control over to Nick and it's all settled, and we can be a family again. Sign the operating control over. You cannot make this stuff up. They actually thought there was a document I could sign to hand my sole ownership to my brother, and that I'd walk into a lawyer's office and do it because Mom asked nicely. And here's the part that hurt even now, even with the win coming. Nick still hadn't fully broken free. He'd asked Craig about Gary Ostrander. I found this out later, and Craig had cried. Actually produced tears, sat in Nick's kitchen, and spun a story about how Gary was a bitter man who'd sabotaged his own business and blamed Craig, how some people can't take accountability. How your sister is doing the exact same thing to you right now, Nick. Can't you see the pattern? And Nick, God help him, half believed it, because believing it was easier than believing he'd been played, and because agreeing with Craig meant he still got to keep the company. Loyalty is a strange thing. Nick's loyalty had never once pointed at me, but now it was split, wavering, and Craig could feel it slipping, so he did what desperate people do. He overreached. He had Nick's wife call me. Then he had my mother threaten to cut me out of the family. Then, this was the mistake, he sent me a text from his own phone, last chance. Sign Friday or I make sure everyone knows what kind of person you really are. I have friends. You don't want me as an enemy. I saved that text. I saved everything. Because here's what I'd been doing while Craig blustered. I'd built the case the way I build a bid completely, with documentation, leaving nothing to argument. I had the state filings proving Voss Growth Partners was a shell. I had Gary Ostrander's sworn, written account of losing $190,000, with his own bank records showing the money flowing to Craig's shell company. Marcus had connected me to 2 other former victims who'd been too ashamed to speak until they heard they weren't alone. Now they were angry and they were talking. I had a forensic timeline. I had Craig's threatening text. And I had a lawyer, my lawyer, one I'd used for a decade, not one Craig had picked, who had reviewed all of it and told me calmly, Deanna, this isn't a family dispute. This is a criminal fraud in progress, and you own everything free and clear. There's nothing for them to transfer. Come Friday, all you have to do is show up and tell the truth. So the second confrontation, the one that broke the spell, I engineered on purpose. I called Nick and I said, I'll come Friday, I'll be there. But I want to bring one guest, and I want you to hear him out for 10 minutes before anyone signs anything. If after 10 minutes you still want to hand your life to Craig, I'll walk out and never say another word about it. Deal. Nick was quiet a long time. Then, in a small voice, a voice I hadn't heard since we were kids, and I used to fight the bigger boys for him. Who's the guest? His name is Gary Ostrander, I said, and Friday you're going to meet him. The lawyer's office was on the 9th floor of a glass building downtown, all beige carpet, and a long polished table that reflected the overcast sky. Craig had chosen the setting to intimidate me. He'd wanted me small in that room, surrounded by family, signing away my life while everyone watched to make sure I didn't make a scene. I got there early. I always get to the important meetings early. I sat at the far end of the table with my lawyer, a quiet woman named Priya in a gray suit, a slim folder in front of us and nothing else. When the folder is thin, people underestimate you. That's the point. They filed in. My father, moving stiffly, his mouth already set in the shape of a man prepared to be disappointed in his daughter. My mother, bright and brittle, carrying a box of pastries like it was a christening. Nick, pale, jittery, unable to meet my eyes. And Craig came in last, blazer, no tie, smile fully deployed, and he took the seat at the head of the table like he'd bought it. He set down a thick stack of paper with a lawyer's cover sheet. His lawyer, the one he'd recommended, was a bored young man who I would later learn had no idea what he'd been dragged into. "Well," Craig said warmly, spreading his hands, "I'm so glad we could all get here. Family healing. This is beautiful. Deanna, I think you'll find everything's in order, if you'll just." "Before anyone signs anything," I said, "my brother and I made a deal, 10 minutes, one guest." I looked at Nick. "You gave me your word." Nick swallowed and nodded, and my mother said, "Deanna, honestly, this is." And I stood up, walked to the door, and opened it. Gary Ostrander came in. He was a big, tired-looking man in his 50s, and he didn't look at anyone but Craig, and the color drained out of Craig Voss's face so fast it was almost a special effect. The smile stayed. The eyes died. "Hello, Craig," Gary said quietly. I don't know this man," Craig said, but his voice had a hairline crack in it now. "You knew me for 14 months, Gary said. You knew me for $190,000. He turned to Nick, and he was gentle about it because I'd asked him to be. "You're Nick. Craig's coaching you. Tells you the business needs a rebrand, an onboarding retainer, an investment in something called Voss Growth Partners. Tells you your family doesn't understand your vision. Tells you the one person warning you is just jealous." Gary's voice wavered. "That was my sister-in-law he said that about. She was right. I didn't listen. I lost the business my wife's father spent 40 years building. I almost lost my marriage. All because I wanted to believe a man in a blazer thought I was special." The room was silent. My mother had put the pastry box down. I opened the thin folder. I didn't raise my voice. I've never once needed to raise my voice in a room where I have the paper. "Voss Growth Partners LLC," I said, sliding the first page to the center of the table. "Registered 8 months ago. Address is a UPS store. Craig's claimed acquisitions, the software company, the logistics platform, don't exist in any state or federal record. Here are 2 more people besides Gary. Here are the bank records showing their money flowing into that shell." Page after page, quiet and flat, laid down like cards. "And here," I set down the last one, "is the text Craig sent me 4 days ago from his own phone, threatening to destroy my reputation if I didn't sign today." Craig started to rise. "This is slander, I'll have you." "Sit down, Craig," Priya said, without heat. "It's not slander when it's documented, and it's certainly not slander when there's an active fraud complaint already filed with the state attorney general's office, which there is, as of yesterday." Craig sat. And then I turned to my family, to the people who had done the quiet arithmetic that valued 13 years of my life at zero, and I said the thing I'd come to say. There was never anything to transfer. I let that land. Evergreen Ridge Grounds is a single-member LLC. I am the single member. I own 100% of it, every contract, every truck, the bond, the lease, the accounts, all of it. Mom, Dad, you didn't give Nick my company on Sunday. You can't. It was never yours. All you gave him was a con man and a lie. I looked at my father. You told me he deserves it because he has kids. You handed my life's work to a man who was about to lose it to a criminal inside of 6 months. That's what your judgment was worth. My father opened his mouth, and nothing came out. And Nick made the decisive move, the one I'd hoped for and hadn't dared to count on. He stood up, and he pushed Craig's thick stack of papers away from himself, all the way across the table, and he said in a voice that finally sounded like a grown man's, "Get out, Craig. And if you contact my kids, my wife, or my sister ever again, I'll testify against you personally." Craig looked around the table for one ally. He found none. Then he gathered his blazer and his bewildered young lawyer and he left, and the smile never came back on. Craig Voss did not vanish this time, because for the first time he'd left a paper trail and 3 angry victims who knew each other. The state attorney general's office consolidated the complaints. Gary and the 2 others testified. My documentation, the shelf filings, the bank flows, the timeline I'd built like a bid packet, became the spine of the case. Craig was charged with multiple counts of fraud and theft. His coaching business collapsed the moment his name hit the local news. It turned out a man whose entire product is the appearance of success cannot survive being publicly revealed as a thief. Voss Growth Partners was frozen and dissolved. He is, as of this writing, awaiting sentencing, and the restitution ordered so far will follow him for the rest of his working life. No Blazer fixes that. Gary got a portion of his money back through the restitution order, not all of it. But he told me the bigger thing he got back was the ability to look his wife in the eye, and that he'd have testified for free just to watch Craig's face on the 9th floor. My family is a more complicated ending, because real families don't resolve like courtroom scenes. My parents did beg. It took about 5 months. 5 months during which Nick's gifted company turned out to be, of course, still entirely mine, still running, still thriving. While Nick sat with the wreckage of the vision Craig had sold him and slowly understood how close he'd come to losing everything and dragging his kids down with it. My mother called, and this time the brittle cheer was gone. There was just an old woman crying, saying she'd been wrong, that she'd let fear about the grandchildren's future turn into something ugly, that she was sorry. My father never quite managed the word sorry. What he managed was to show up at my yard one morning, stand by the retired first truck, and say gruffly, I should have co-signed that loan. From him, that was an apology carved out of granite. I took it. I did not give anyone the company. Let me be very clear about that. I own Evergreen Ridge grounds, and I will die owning it or sell it on my own terms. But I forgave them, mostly, in the slow, reserved way you forgive people you're not going to fully trust again, but still love out of long habit. Nick and I are, strangely, closer now than we've ever been because the fantasy that I was his rival finally died, and underneath it was just the little brother I used to fight the big kids for. He asked, humbly, if he could learn the business from the ground up. Actually learn it. So he drives a truck now, on a crew, at a fair wage, and he's not bad at it, and his kids come to the yard on Saturdays and fight over who gets to hold the hose. I like that. The Harborview contract, by the way, renewed. Patris sends me referrals now. I still carry the key. The single steel key to the first truck, worn smooth. I used to think it was sentimental, a little souvenir of where I started. I understand it differently now. That key was never just a memory. It was the truth I'd been carrying in my pocket the whole time, through the living room and the parking lot and the 9th floor. That the thing you build with your own hands belongs to you, and no family verdict, no man in a blazer, no amount of he has kids can sign it away. They did the math and decided I was worth 0. Turns out I was the one holding the only number that counted.